Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we like to dig a little bit deeper and get to the heart of issues facing our society. Anyway, what I promised a couple weeks ago when I did a show on the sexual revolution that I would go into more detail about how our basic instincts, so to speak, are used against us by those who know how to exercise power. And what I mean by exercise power is how to exercise psychology on the masses, which most people are really quite unaware of how it really does work. So, before I go on here, and I promise you this is going to be very informative, something you will not want to miss. I would encourage people to check out my website, and that's linked in the comments section, since I guess we can't use annotations anymore on YouTube. And it's also subscribe to my channel so that you can keep aware of and abreast of new videos and shows that are put up. So anyway, what I would like to deal with first and foremost is just a brief description of the science fiction novel that I turned out recently, and it's called The Destiny of Our Past. Now, in it, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are actually employed by the society in order to control the people. Unlike dystopian novels such as 1984, for instance, it's not one in which the government uses poverty and despair to control the masses. Oh, on the contrary, it uses affluence to control the masses. It uses religion, or lack of, to control the masses. Of course, I'd have to explain that the ruling elite, they are quite spiritual, whereas they want to destroy religion amongst the common people in their society because they feel it's an easier way to control them. I'll get into a little bit more of that later. And it is a science fiction book set during a 3-month period running up to the Great Flood, or, what some people call Noah's Flood. And yes, it is science fiction. And, you can look at some of these books in the Apocrypha, and you'll see that the description of society doesn't seem to be one that fits the idea of these movies that show that era or period being one where, everyone's a farmer or something. If you're mixing species to create new species, and you're using techniques to do it that are not magical, then obviously there's some biotechnology going on. But anyway, that's enough of the book. If you want to learn more, just go to Amazon, The Destiny of Our Past. Now, going on to that other dystopian book that I mentioned, though, 1984, which, I've heard that it's becoming more popular out there. I wonder why that is. Maybe the collective psyche, a lot of people are really realizing that maybe there's some people have decided to use 1984 as a training manual rather than a warning on where society can go. But opposite of my novel, in which sex and sexuality are broken up in such a way that it is used to a large degree just to keep people pacified, because they're either using virtual reality or they're hooking up indiscriminately to a large degree. The 1984 presents a very bleak society in which such things as family are looked upon as a place where your children could turn you in for being against the government. Relationships, no one really knows who is working for Big Brother and who isn't. And it's kind of a asexual, it seems that the society is going asexual in the sense that you have announcements made, for instance, at least in the movie version, where there's this praise of people that are abstaining from sexual practices. Of course, I guess then we would be thinking that the women would have children through artificial insemination. But again, that would be breaking down the family unit. You see, the family unit is one of those things that is, well, it's dangerous to a society that wants to maintain control. And what I mean by control is that kind of totalitarian control, that you control the mind, not just the actions. An authoritarian government can threaten to throw you in jail or beat you up or any number of things to make you comply with whatever the laws or norms of that society are. Totalitarian, on the other hand, refers to the idea that that's not enough. You've got to get people to think a certain way, to act a certain way, to only speak a certain way. Wow, that sounds like a lot of things going on in today's society with political correctness. We'll get to that too. Now, the family unit, I know I've read up on cults, and some of these cults would actually discourage people from getting married and reproducing. In fact, some of the more modern ones even will not allow the person to reproduce. You have to submit to being sterilized. And it's not so much that they're ecological and just thinking, oh, well, man, humans are this virus on the face of the earth that has to go away. No, that's not the idea. The idea is that the family unit, if you have one, a husband is going to be more loyal to his wife or a wife to her husband or either to their children than any form of loyalty to government. Okay? If you have a choice between being loyal to the government and being loyal to your family, the average sane thinking person will be loyal to their family. And this then is seen as a threat to authoritarian regimes. And so, therefore, you have to undermine the family. Now, you're probably thinking, well, which authoritarian regimes? You're thinking Mussolini or, all these kinds of entities. But I'm saying more of the kind of systems that we're seeing developing, more of the scientific, technocratic way of thinking, in which you get compliance to the norms without having to go out and beat people up. And one of the things I would point out is that many of the Western societies today, I'm not going to say it's conspiracy, but I'm not going to say it's not a conspiracy of some sorts. It could just be a certain type of person has come to the top in reference to their views and values and so forth, and they just see that, they see that other people get put in good positions that share those kinds of ideas and ideologies. But now let's take a look at what's going on in today's society. We see a minimization of the importance of family. We see our entertainment in which it seems that if there are families presented, the family is presented as dysfunctional. It's not something you really would want to be in. Marriage often, if you compare it to maybe the way marriages were shown 30 years ago, you don't see that closeness. Even in comedies 30 years ago, like an All in the Family and something like that. That might be more like 40 years ago, but a show like All in the Family, at least the couples that were presented were, loving. They may disagree with each other, but they were loving. And the ones you see now, it just seems to be more of I don't know, it's kind of an antagonism that you see in the relationships presented. Maybe this is one of the reasons why young people are shunning marriage right now, is because they've grown up with these kinds of images of what marriage and family is, and it's certainly not presented as a really wonderful alternative. But that works to the favor of the state. It actually works for corporations too, because the state is able to control people easier. If people aren't getting married and having families, then they're more like work units, and You don't have to spend money on such things as daycare or schools. If you've got double income, no kids, or they're just single, then it works well with corporations, because that means the people have more discretionary disposable income in which they can buy all kinds of goodies that you come out with and say, hey, you need to have this, because if you don't have this, you're not trendy. Okay? So think about that, though. Think about that. You're sacrificing the joys and beauties of family, the ability to pass your legacy on for toys. I mean, come on. That's like in the Bible where you have Jacob and Esau sells his birthright out for a bowl of soup. That's, kind of the same thing. Okay, trading something wonderful for something that's not nearly as meaningful overall. And so ultimately, though, it still works really well in a consumer society. Now, of course, that consumer society cannot maintain itself. It's like a drug addict who, to get that high, it might mean eventually they're going to die. But that's just the nature of the social psychology we see in our societies today. Now, the other thing you want to get rid of is religion. And again, it's not so much an intellectual thing. Religion is attacked, and you wonder why all of a sudden, I've noticed this about 5-6 years ago, you started seeing this huge amount of negativity towards religion being rolled out in social media. Again, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm not saying it's not. But ultimately, religion gives an advantage to a people, and that is it gives them another framework to look at besides whatever the government says. Religion allows you to say, wait a minute, I don't agree with this. I will live and do and think differently than whatever the society says. And that could be seen as very negative. Now, you can look at the case where Jews throughout the history of many societies, but if you look at Europe 500-600 years ago, Jews were looked down upon not so much for their religion, even though they had a different religion than the prevailing Christian religion in Europe. They also were outsiders. They tended to stick within their own traditions. They didn't just give up their traditions and assimilate. And many people saw that as a threat, that they weren't going along. They weren't conforming. And in human nature, there is a tribal sense that those who don't conform are not part of the group. They're looked at a little differently. Now, you could say the same thing for groups like Mormons today. You can look at this, in essentially any religious minority within a population is seen in some ways as being outsiders. And so people, they have that finger to their chin and giving that little nod like, I wonder what, and then you get all these conspiracy theories out there, that, most of them are totally ridiculous, but, they still come out there, and then people go, yeah, I'm not sure what those people are doing. And so, sometimes people fill in the blanks instead. But religion, like with the Pope in Poland, Pope John, I believe it was, when I may be wrong about that. Anyway, I was just the idea is though that during the 1980s, the Pope as Paul. Anyway, it was one of the apostle names. Anyway, he was negative to communism, and he rallied the Polish people. And this was what started the Soviet Union really starting to collapse once people started showing civil disobedience in a major Eastern European country. And then it just, the dominoes just fell and communism would fall because of that. If there had been no Pope from Poland, if the Poles had given up on their Catholicism, chances are communism would have stayed around much longer. Romania, it was also a situation that people's religious views unified them when they went up against communism. So religion can play a very, very strong influence on people, and therefore often states, even if they agree with the religion, even if you have a state religion, will tend to be weary of that power and will try to rein it in. That's why kings used to always want to have a say in what archbishops and bishops were chosen, because they were worried that someone could come along and question their lifestyles. Ethnic identity, very important, because if you feel that you have your own culture, it doesn't necessarily mean race, but ethnic identity can mean, Irish American or Italian American or Mexican American. And it gives you a certain sense of who you are and where you came from. And so therefore, again, it chips away at that, let's make everyone the same. And of course, that sameness can lead to the ability to be able to control people more from the government level. Now, there's another aspect to all of these that I would like people to consider. And if you can make a person into the ideal citizen, one who is no longer really connected to family that strongly, they have shunned religion, they have shunned any kind of ethnic identity they have, they've become this individual. And I don't mean individual in the sense of the free thinker, the kind of Missourian type person, the show me state, you got to prove something to me. No, I mean the individual as in a fragmented, autonomous unit. And if they are that way, they are far easier to control because you no longer have any social frameworks that will work to make them question the society. And furthermore, without these kinds of foundations, that means they're more likely to be led by emotional appeal. Because no longer will they say, well, wait a minute, my religion says this, or wait a minute, I was raised this way, or wait a minute. They instead can be swayed by very powerful psychological campaigns to get them to kind of work against their own instincts and become part of the norm, become part of whatever is being promoted at the time. Somewhat of a groupthink, so to speak. The idea that when you're in the group, you let the group control you. And if the group is saying, well, this is the way things are because it's really important that this be the way things are, you're more likely to agree with it. All right? And this is very dangerous because I think more people have died in the last couple of centuries because of governments doing this than any religious wars or any kinds of other sorts of threats. But ultimately, we should resist these kinds of ideas that say, let's throw away our past. Let's throw away who or what we are and just become one. That doesn't work. That is not going to bring about a free-thinking democratic society. Because then you are subject more to emotional appeal to whoever holds the reins, whoever controls the media, whoever controls the government, whoever controls the education system. All right? Not saying, there's not good things that come out of education and government and so forth. I'm just saying that sometimes, power does get exercised. And it gets exercised in ways that are not necessarily conducive towards the individuality that people may want to pursue. Now, other things that we should consider in reference to this are, other things that we may want to consider is that people are conforming. by nature. I was reading a psychological study that was actually a series of studies that have been done on conformity. And our brains are hardwired to want to be part of the group. And this is tribal, and maybe it presented people the ability to be able to survive in the past. Okay, you didn't want everyone just kind of saying, "Hey, there's a threat coming," and everyone going, "Well, I'd rather not participate," and then that threat comes in and wipes you out. However, this conformity can be used to make sure that people are no longer able to essentially. This conformity can go against us. If our instincts and drives, if our thought patterns are turned against us by a omnipresent media, and I will actually say social media as well, then we could create a situation in which people will work against their own interest. And now think about this for a while. Conformity has been used throughout the culture. I mean, the military, we have uniforms. Uniform means everyone being uniform, everyone going with the crowd. Again, in a warlike situation, it might work well, but not in a society situation in which we want to maintain democracy. We want to maintain freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and so forth. But this is actually being chipped away at sources all around us. We have, for instance, just the societal sources that would say, well, this is proper and this isn't proper. But then also we have governments. I wonder this. Now here I'm going to throw in something that I'm wondering, about conspiracy here. Now, we have all of these things coming along about, political correctness. We have speech codes. We have all these things all of a sudden showing up all over the United States and much of the Western world, in which people are starting to become afraid to say how they feel about things. Now, the danger I see here goes beyond just the idea of being scared of saying things. It becomes the fear that people are going to stop also thinking things, because they're going to get an idea of this is how a proper human being is supposed to think, feel, and react in a situation. And if we start teaching this to our young people, then it will become part of the norms once they wind up in their 20s, 30s, and 40s and start assuming positions of influence in the society. And if it continues to get stronger and stronger and stronger in these institutions, then you may wind up with a situation in which people, they don't necessarily want to rebel, because the idea is if you say something that could be offensive to someone, well, then that is hurtful. Remember, we go back to emotion. Emotions being used to sell something. And therefore, you may have a situation in which freedom of speech and other freedoms as well just are not important anymore. I've seen polls that have shown that a lot of people on college campuses today, if they're asked, what's more important, freedom of speech or someone not getting their feelings hurt? And they'll say, someone not getting their feelings hurt. And again, this has been really pushed, not from any rational sense, but it has been pushed emotionally. We have to do this because we don't want to be mean. Okay? Most people don't want to be mean. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings. But if you're, but it goes to the point where pretty soon it's like someone says, oh, I support, the Republicans. And then someone starts crying and saying, this is wrong. How could you be a Republican? Republicans do this and this and this. And it may not even be true, but it's what they believe. And therefore, it hurts their feelings if you say you're a Republican. So therefore, we need to ban Republicans. Okay? That is not too far-fetched because it's happening. Okay? It's really happening. To where there are people justifying these kinds of things in order not to hurt people's feelings. Now, at the same time, as people start going insular, because maybe they're afraid of, offending someone, so they don't socialize as much, they're afraid of getting into relationships because they're afraid of all the negative consequences that can happen from it. They don't want to take challenges anymore. They're scared. So they become insular. And they start doing things like substituting porn for togetherness, substituting games for real challenges, substituting network news for real information. We're becoming a substitute culture. Well, we substitute goods for true meaning in life. This is, I guess, the ultimate expression of consumerism. But all things that you get that are wonderful require effort. But we're teaching people not to expend effort. If it means it's going to hurt or you're going to sweat, then there's no reason to go running, because you're beautiful anyway and people should accept you for who you are. And therefore, our PE courses in America have turned into, hey, how much do you appreciate physical education? You kind of walked a little bit around the track. Let's go ahead and give you a good grade, okay? Or let's substitute things. Anyway, as I was saying, I mean, if we teach young people that the easiest way out is to go ahead and not do something, if the easiest way to confront something that may be controversial is to silence the person who's doing or saying something controversial, then what we wind up with is a society in which nothing gets expended. Our bodies, maybe we're looking at our bodies as being controversial or whatever. We're trying to say that health, the things like exercise and things like this are they're being pushed in order to make us conform to a certain body ideal. Well, this kind of gets into people's minds. Exercise is difficult. Exercise is hard. So if you have a situation in which someone's not really wanting to do something, then they can fall back on that. And therefore, they will get out of shape. And this will harm them in the future. Biology is biology, regardless of what our feelings are, okay? Biology is biology. It does not matter. And then you get into such things as, we maybe part of this whole thing with trying to make everyone safe. When you're 2 and 3 years old, well, we can't have playgrounds because you could get hurt. Or we have to put Nerf stuff around so you don't fall and hurt yourself. We have to make sure that whenever a kid is outside and playing, that they have adult supervision, which means that kids, when they're 4 and 5, can't even be out in their backyard and have some time to think and just look at a bird or look at the clouds without mom or dad or someone staring out at them to make sure they're not getting hurt, or heaven forbid, they might get bitten by an ant or something. This is creating a weak culture and weak individuals. And then those individuals will have a very hard time forming any kind of social attachments. Because, like I said, it's difficult to be able to connect to someone when you're unable to really even be on good terms with your own individual challenges. Anyway, so basically I feel that today's society, and I think some of it is just things that have happened. I think some of it is actually planned. I mean, you can look up the psychology of social control, and you can find lots of information on how things are actually done behind the scenes to affect us. Things have grown a lot since the days of Edward Bernays and the creation of the public relations industry. And so what we need to do is we need to be cognizant of this and realize that who we are is being manipulated by those who want to make us someone different. And they're usually using our own sense of values, our own instincts, and our own emotions to get us to behave the way they want us to behave. I'm going to diverge a little bit from the topic from the last half of the show. And what I'd like to go into is actually what is the number one threat to our society today? Before I go on, if this is if you're listening to this on YouTube later, please subscribe to this channel, as well as checking out the links that I've included in the comment section below that will take you to my official website. And in my last science, well, it's actually my first science fiction, but it's my last book. In my first science fiction book, The Destiny of Our Past, it's set during the era of Noah, about 3 months before the flood. And of course, since it's science fiction, I take the premise that what we're talking about is an advanced society, not a bunch of people living in, grass huts or something like that. And essentially, it is a society in which the ruling elite want to get rid of the vast majority of the population, or what they call the commoners. And they do this through affluence, not through deprivation. They do this through causing people to be absorbed by the self and their own selfish needs, rather than that of any sort of traditions, religion, or community. Whereas their own elite circles, they have a totally different view towards these things because they recognize the importance of it. Now, what I would like to do is actually, even though this is a fictional book, I'm going to actually apply a lot of the premises onto today's society, American, but also Western society in general. And what I'd like to do is start with two quotes, what I would consider very profound quotes. And the first is from Aristotle. Now, Aristotle said, "Tolerance and apathy are the last virtues of a dying society." Okay? Now, what he says by tolerance is not necessarily extolling the virtues of intolerance. And I don't think what he's talking about is the libertarian or more conservative notion towards tolerance, meaning that, hey, I'm okay with how you view life and so forth. I won't step on your toes, you don't step on mine. But I think it's more of that kind of tolerance where it's sort of like, who cares what's going on? I don't care, because it doesn't really matter anyway. Now, and that connects more with apathy. So I think that's what he's saying, is this sort of, who cares? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we, get drowned in a great global deluge or something. No, it means that, this whole idea that you live and you die. And this kind of notion, which I'm going to talk about in more detail here, does not lend to a society that's going to survive very long. Now, there's another quote from Lawrence McKinley Gould. Okay? And you can look this up. I think it's very profound. "I do not believe the greatest threat to our future is from bombs or guided missiles. I don't think our civilization will die that way. I think it will die when we no longer care, when the spiritual forces that make us wish to be right and noble die in our hearts." Now, this relates to Aristotle very closely. It touches on the idea that when a society just essentially is sort of, whatever. You could call it the more modern society, the whatever phase. Then it's very close to what we could call nihilism. Nihilism's that sort of sense that, again, it's kind of the you live, you die, it doesn't matter. It's related to existentialism, but I'm not going to go into a lot of literature here. What I would like to point out, though, is that if you have competing civilizations on Earth, and we do, we have various groups of people, be they ethnic, be they religious, or whatever, and some of them have the idea that, hey, the future's great, it's going to be, we're building a society that will show the virtues of who we are, and they take pride in who they are. That civilization will likely continue. Whereas one that's sort of like live life for the present, you are what you buy, your goodies, the consumerism that pervades our land, it doesn't have much of a future. It really doesn't. Now, the thing is, we could take a look at, and I'm not going to just get down on capitalism here, we can look at the Soviet Union and the years just before it collapsed. Now, you could take a look at what Soviet society truly was and see that at least maybe after the initial we've overthrown the cruel, exploitive whatevers, that quickly just turned into a society that was perpetuating itself on the notion of, let's promote communism to the world, and let's show the virtues of who we are as an ideology. And I think it would have died out quicker if it actually hadn't been for the threats that it had from the rest of the world, especially when Hitler invaded. Now remember, of course, the Soviets and Hitler were buddies for a few years, and then Hitler betrayed that treaty during Operation Barbarossa. And he did what a lot of civilizations have done. They made the mistake of invading Russia. Okay? Not a good thing. Maybe the United States should look at that now and keep that in mind. However, this kind of brought more of a nationalism into the Soviet society, because Stalin had to promote nationalism and let loose a little bit on his reins on religion, which before he would totally stomped on. And this kept it going for a little bit longer, but by the time you started reaching the 1970s and 80s, there was somewhat of a depression, and I don't mean that economically. I mean there was a depression in the sense that everyone knew it was just kind of it was fake. It was a fallacy. And they were just waiting for, I think they were actually kind of waiting for an excuse to, get rid of it. Because if you take a look at when they actually did, when communism was overthrown, it was fairly bloodless. And for the most part, it was, very much welcomed by the masses when it was overthrown. But the people didn't care. If the people had really cared about communism, they would have taken to the streets and they would have preserved it. Instead, it was like, yeah, okay, it's gone, yay, let's see what we can get from the West, and adapt to our culture. Now, of course, many of those people were thinking that once they became, more capitalistic, that they would all be driving around nice Ferraris and, having nice villas on the Black Sea. That was not the case. However, there was this hope that they could have something different. Now, during about 10 years before Putin came to power, Russia was sort of like this, let's just go in and exploit it. There was a lot of oligarchs. There was a lot of foreign interests that were taking advantage of the situation. And it was dismal. There was a depression. There was a malaise. I was there, during this period. And it was really, really sad, what was happening. The society has changed to a large degree, and their government has really promoted this idea of getting back this idea of being connected to their Orthodox roots and their history. And it has revitalized the society. I don't think it's all just because they have oil and they have a better economy. I think ultimately it's more that they have a more revitalized psyche and spirit that has enabled them to then use their resources and be able to build something that, Russians today are quite proud of. All right? So but their society did. Under communism, people were just like getting disillusioned and they didn't care. And that's the most deadly place to be in a society. Now, let's take a look at Western society today. Now, before I begin, though, most of Western society is Christian, at least in name. And the Bible says in the Ten Commandments, so I guess this is applicable to Jews as well as Muslims, actually. In the Ten Commandments, there is the passage that says, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long in the land. It's the only one of those 10 commandments that comes with a promise, and it's not a thou shalt not. Okay? It's more of a thou shalt. And I don't think it's necessarily saying that you should, it's just saying obey your parents. I don't think that's the case. I think this is much deeper in that it means connect to your ancestors. Connect to who you are ultimately. Be able to see that long chain that connects you to all the sacrifices that came before you and the ones that will come after you. Now, a person that has this sense is more likely to think in terms of the future. I've known of many people who said the reason they never got involved with drugs was because they wanted to be parents someday, and therefore they didn't want to mess up their bodies and mess up perhaps their reproductive cells and have children that were deformed in some way. So in a biological sense, you can see how this works. But also psychologically, if you have a sense of who you are, then you're going to be more likely to have this identity that will be passed on to your future generations. You're also going to be more into the idea of building something. I mean, let me give you an example. Let's say you rent some property. It's got some land on it. But you work and you're a pretty busy person. Are you really going to take that much time to go out and plant an orchard in the backyard? Plant some trees so that maybe 20 years later it's going to be abundant in fruit? Probably not. However, if you own the property yourself and you intend on living there for the next 20 or 30 years, and you also have this sense that, someday I'll pass this land on to my children, and hopefully one of them will want to live here and continue. Then when you plant those trees, when you're going to be thinking, maybe someday I won't see it, but my great-grandkids will be playing in these trees and picking apples or cherries or whatever from what I'm doing today. There is the ultimate connection, okay, that keeps a society alive and thriving. Consumerism doesn't do it. Consumerism is death to a society. Now, I would tend to think that means that people have to have a vision. They have to be thinking, what do I want to make the world a better place? What do I want to make life better for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and on and on and on. But if you don't have this sense, if your sense is everything's just for now, there's kind of a who cares, there's a sense of I'm just my own person, and whatever makes me feel good at the time is important, and that's going to create a sense that you're not going to really want to sacrifice. You're going to really want to sacrifice in order to create children, in order to care for them, in order to pass your culture on to them, because it's not as important to you anymore. Okay, and I think much of Western society really doesn't care. Okay, and there's some people out there that say, well, maybe Islam will someday be the religion of Europe. I wouldn't be surprised, because most Muslims I know, they really do care. They have a sense of a mission. They have a sense that that this is what God has given them in their holy scriptures, and so of course they're going to be more likely to have children and to pass on their I was going to say genes, but that's true too. Pass on their teachings and their various cultures. And, I look at Christianity, and yes, there are many Christians that still have the old notions, the old values, and so forth. But I look at that much of Christianity since the 1970s has turned more into some sort of self-improvement, self-help type of religion. It has become more individualistic and has lost its communal significance. The people no longer see themselves as a body, okay, in a real sense. I hear people say, the body of Christ and so forth. But it's not this sense that, it's not like a fraternal sense. It's not a sense of being interconnected and this is my brother, my sister, and we will go forward with the faith. And we will build that great, city of Enoch or whatever. And that's not there. It's not. They still may go to church, but it's still the driving to church, do your thing, come home, and then go back into what they would actually consider the real world. And that is not what Christianity was 100 years ago, and it's not what will propel the religion into the future as any kind of dynamic force. All right? It leaves people empty. Consumerism, any allowance for consumerism to take hold in a society is ultimately destructive because it doesn't give people that sense of belonging or meaning in life. And so therefore, there's where the problem is. And this will then go back to that idea that's put forth by Gould and put forth by Aristotle, that the civilization is going to die when people just give up. And we often have been I would say brainwashed to believe that what really creates a good society is our economic performance. But an economic performance does not mean you're going to have a future as a civilization. Now, on a spreadsheet, on an economic spreadsheet, the person that would actually be making the most contribution to a society economically at the time would be a couple who are a double income, no kids. A couple that have decided just to work. They both go to work 40 hours a week, and they don't bring any kids into the picture. I mean, the woman's not going to take off any time for work to have a baby or babies. You're not going to have any worries in regards to, people having to stay home with kids and so forth. They just produce and produce and produce and produce. But you know what's going to happen later? That group will die. Because that couple has not, if there's a lot of them as a group conglomerate, they're not producing children. And therefore you get this on paper, yay, we're up here and things are good, and then it collapses and ceases to exist. And in that sense, then we come to, the death of a civilization. Now, there's always been people who have not had kids or not been able to have kids and so forth, but it's always been such a small minority that the that the ones who do have kids more than make up for it. I mean, you look at countries like Germany, where somewhere between 30 and 40% of German women don't intend on having children. Okay. Now, what about the others, the 60s or more percent that do want to have kids, but yet they intend on only having one or two? Or when they do try to have kids, they can't because they're infertile, or the woman doesn't get married and she doesn't want to go to the sperm bank or something like that. Then you're talking about maybe more than half of the population of young women today in Germany don't or won't have any kids. So that, I think, has more of an element of a spirituality or lack of that gets back to, well, what Gould says here. I think it will die when we no longer care, when the spiritual forces that make us wish to be right and noble die in our hearts. You have the nihilism. You have the live for the present. You have the my career is more important than anything else. because we've created new gods in our society. Our gods are our careers. And that's good. That's true for men and women both. I'm not just centering on women. I'm also saying men too. Because men traditionally had a job in order to care for their family. Okay? And many women also worked. And it was because it was to care for their family, to be able to bring in more money. But that's turned around now to where the career itself is the thing that you do, and the family becomes secondary. The family becomes, well, if I can squeeze it in, maybe I'll have a kid or two. You know, and when they're 38 or 39, they're like, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just skip it. And then it's a couple years later, it's, you know, it's not even an issue anymore. Even if they decide, oh, maybe I should have had a kid. And this also what we seem to worship is superficiality in our culture. We have this kind of sense that people sit in front of a TV and they want simple stuff. They want junk food for the mind. Now I can understand to a certain degree when someone comes home from work that maybe they're not so much into watching a documentary or something. They just want to relax and watch something stupid. But if it comes to 4 and 5 hours a night watching just mindless stuff that's put out there, the only reason it's put out there is to get you to watch the commercials. That's all. I mean, unless you watch the cable networks, and of course you've already paid for those. But, when it comes to the network TV, it's to make you watch the commercials. We're going to give you something that's going to keep you in front of the TV set. Think about that for a moment. We put these shows on so you sit in front of the TV set, and when we come on with our commercials, voila, you've got it. It would be like in the old days when the snake oil salesman would come into a small community. He might have a young, pretty assistant just standing there who's kind of flirting with her eyes with all the men in the audience. So they'll sit and listen to his presentation. It's the same concept. And it doesn't matter whether it's the news, quote unquote, or it's the entertainment, because it's all the same. News programs the news is designed to get you to, because there's such a vast amount of stories that can be told. They pick the stories that are going to keep you glued to the TV. And they're going to elicit the best response, like fear and anxiety, so that you will buy the products. Because it's been shown psychologically, if you're in a state of heightened fear or anxiety, you're more likely to buy commercial products. This is what we're worshiping now. Okay, our altars are no longer on a hillside or in a monastery or in a synagogue or in a church or whatever. They are most people's altar is sitting in front of that electronic box or screen now every day and just watching the stuff that comes across. And then when you do go to church, it's kind of a feel-good thing, but the minister gives you kind of a light version of the Bible. It's no longer that, hey, you should be doing this and this and this. Oh, that could offend someone. Okay? You don't talk about the things that can offend people, especially the ones that contribute a lot of money in your congregation. So you don't want to step on toes. So you find the stuff that's going to, tickle the soul, so to speak. And so, again, this is not something, that requires a great deal of sacrifice. Now, of course, you might give some money. That's a sacrifice. But it's not a sacrifice of blood, sweat, and tears, which maybe traditionally your beliefs in your religion were based on those things. So it wasn't the light stuff. And we think about what kind of future we're leaving our kids. We're all concerned about, we got to give them money, we got to give them designer clothes, we got to give them iPhones, we got to give them all these wonderful things. But at the same time, a culture of superficiality makes for weak children. Because they get and they get and they get. There's no sense of sweat and there's no sense of sacrifice. Okay, not the way it used to be where, Christmas you got one toy and you really appreciated that toy because it's what you got for Christmas. It is now an expectation. And then when you go into school and the teachers are talking about you've got to sacrifice your time and your efforts to get good grades, they're kind of like going, what's he talking about, man? I have no idea what he's talking. What language is he talking? And the other one's going, I don't know. Oh, whoa, this is really strange. And then you get students that make it and go into college, and they're like, hey, the professor just said something I disagree with. Well, how dare she say that? I'm going to go report this to the student newspaper about how horrible this person is. This kind of culture is growing because of this consumeristic apathy and, a sense of making everything easy. Easy cultures, no, they don't exist. And if civilization, if you suddenly had a quasar go off somewhere near our star system, of course it would have gone off a long time ago, the speed of light. But if it did, and it wiped out all of our electronics, even a solar flare could do that. It was a strong enough one. Or just, some crazy country sets off EMP bombs. And it destroyed our electrical grid. People would have to toughen up to survive. Because if they didn't, they would die. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, right now, what do I do? Do I have chocolate ice cream tonight, or do I have vanilla ice cream? Of course, there's 150 different flavors you could choose from nowadays. And that makes, this is our decisions that we're making. Now, yes, there's nothing wrong with affluence. There's nothing wrong with advancing. But there's some point that Nietzsche even pointed out that civilizations get to when they stop. And then the generations just kind of thinking to themselves, let's play. And then it becomes less than desirable. So, they're like, oh, well, this is no fun. What do we do now? Well, I don't know. What do we do? Well, obviously, it's not going to be building up the civilization. So then they die. And this is exactly what that Gould and Aristotle are talking about, is you get to that point where nothing matters, and, when I'm dead and gone, who cares? All right? Again, if this is what people are going to believe, if this is what people are going to go for, this will be what ends American society as we know it, Western society, or any other society on earth that adopts these values. It will cause them to crumble. And not so much, go out with a bang. They'll go out with kind of a, I guess you could say it would be kind of a sigh, as they just kind of, pass on, and, that's it. So, I think people should think about this, that maybe we do need to start focusing on some sort of premise that which we look to the future and attach to it. And I don't think ideologies are going to really fit anymore. In fact, I have a hard time thinking it's going to be anything but some sort of at least partially religious sort of way of connecting and being able to look into the future and feel this sense of pride and sacrifice. And, I think that's what will build our families up. I think that's what will build our institutions up. And I think that's what will propel us into the future. Otherwise, there is no future, and, that's just it. Anyway, we're running out of time here, so thanks for tuning in, and I hope you'll be back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCYDP Productions.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of